Have you ever wondered why some women, despite dedicating their lives to nurturing, healing, and uplifting others, find themselves utterly depleted, bleeding alone in the shadows of their own unspoken pain? It's a paradox as ancient as the feminine mystique itself, a silent suffering often masked by a veneer of strength and selflessness. These are the modern-day priestesses of compassion, the tireless caregivers, the empathetic listeners who absorb the emotional fallout of the world around them, yet rarely, if ever, find a sanctuary for their own fractured spirits. They are the architects of other people's peace, the silent warriors who mend broken wings, only to find their own soaring spirit tethered by invisible chains. This phenomenon, this deep-seated imbalance, touches the very core of our understanding of empathy, self-sacrifice, and the often unseen wounds beneath the surface of a seemingly composed exterior. It speaks to a profound psychological pattern, a dance with the shadow self where personal needs are consistently sacrificed at the altar of external validation and perceived duty. Consider Alara, a woman whose very essence seemed to radiate warmth and understanding. From her earliest memories, Alara was the confidant, the problem solver, the one everyone instinctively turned to. Her childhood home, often a crucible of unspoken tension and emotional volatility, had inadvertently cast her in the role of the family's emotional anchor. Her mother, perpetually anxious, and her father, often withdrawn, unknowingly shaped Alara's nascent psyche into a finely tuned instrument for detecting and alleviating distress. She learned to anticipate needs before they were voiced, to soothe anxieties before they erupted, to mend rifts before they widened. This early conditioning, while fostering an extraordinary capacity for empathy, also etched a deep-seated belief within her. Her worth was inextricably linked to her utility to others, her ability to make them feel whole. As Alara matured, this pattern solidified. In her friendships, she was the bedrock, the one who listened for hours, offered unwavering support, and celebrated triumphs as if they were her own. In her professional life, she gravitated towards roles that demanded profound emotional intelligence. A therapist, a social worker, a mediator. Her clients adored her, praising her uncanny ability to cut through noise and illuminate pathways to healing. "You just get it, Alara," they'd often say, their voices thick with gratitude. Each heartfelt thank you, each visible sign of progress in another's life, felt like a balm, a temporary affirmation of her existence. Yet, beneath this seemingly fulfilling exterior, a gnawing emptiness persisted. After a long day of absorbing the emotional turmoil of others, Alara would return to her meticulously kept, yet achingly silent, apartment. The empathetic reservoir she so freely offered to the world would often run dry, leaving her parched and vulnerable. One evening, after a particularly intense session with a client navigating a traumatic loss, Alara felt a familiar tremor of exhaustion ripple through her. She had spent hours holding space for their grief, meticulously guiding them through the labyrinth of their pain, offering insights gleaned from countless psychological texts and a lifetime of intuitive understanding. As the client left, a faint smile on their face, a profound sense of weariness settled upon Alara. She microwaved a solitary meal, the silence of her apartment amplifying the insistent hum of her own unmet needs. She thought of calling a friend, but the thought of burdening them, of confessing the emotional weight she carried, felt like an insurmountable hurdle. It was a silent agreement she had made with herself, an unwritten rule. I am the helper, not the helped. This internal conflict, this perpetual giving without replenishment, was Alara's shadow at play. Carl Jung posited that the shadow represents the unconscious aspects of the personality which the ego does not identify in itself, parts often hidden from the conscious self due to shame or societal unacceptability. For Alara, her shadow was not a malevolent force, but rather the neglected, yearning part of her that craved reciprocity, that longed for someone to hold her emotional space. She had unconsciously projected her own need for healing onto others, believing that by fixing their wounds, she might somehow indirectly heal her own. This ego projection, a defense mechanism where one attributes their own unacceptable feelings or impulses onto another person, prevented her from confronting her own psychological landscape. She saw the pain in others so clearly, understood their need for compassion so acutely, but remained blind to the echoing chambers of her own soul. The subtle irony of her life was that while she guided others through their individuation process, helping them integrate their fragmented selves, she herself was trapped in a cycle of self-abnegation. Her empathy, once her greatest strength, had become a subtle trap. It was the golden cage she had unknowingly constructed for herself, adorned with the praises of those she healed, but ultimately holding her captive. She offered solutions drawn from Carl Jung's principles of unconditional positive regard and empathic understanding, yet failed to extend that same boundless acceptance to her own vulnerabilities. She encouraged her clients to embrace their authentic selves, to set boundaries, to prioritize self-care. Yet these were lessons she consistently struggled to embody. The turning point, subtle yet profound, began not with a grand revelation, but with a quiet, persistent whisper from within. One morning, after another restless night haunted by the echoes of her client's sorrows, Alara stared at her reflection. Her eyes, usually so vibrant, held a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. She noticed a faint tremor in her hands, a persistent ache in her chest. It was then, in that quiet moment of self-observation, that a quote from William James drifted into her mind. "The deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated." The irony was sharp, almost cutting. She was a master of appreciation for others, yet had starved herself of it. This was not about external appreciation, she realized, but an internal recognition of her own inherent worth, independent of her ability to serve. The character archetype embodying Alara's journey is undeniably the wounded healer. This archetype, deeply rooted in Jungian psychology, describes an individual who, having experienced their own suffering and successfully navigated through it, is then able to facilitate healing in others. However, the shadow side of the wounded healer emerges when they become so consumed by the wounds of others that they neglect their own. The theme here is the critical importance of self-compassion and boundary setting in the pursuit of genuine holistic well-being. For those of you who resonate with Alara's story, who find yourselves consistently pouring from an empty cup, understand this. Your capacity for empathy is a profound gift, but it is not boundless. Your own well-being is not a luxury. It is the very foundation upon which your ability to help others rests. You cannot give what you do not possess. Begin by acknowledging the validity of your own needs, your own weariness, your own silent aches. Dare to whisper your vulnerabilities, first to yourself and then to a trusted few. Just as you guide others to their light, it is time to illuminate your own path, to tend to the bleeding wounds you have so diligently hidden away. What unacknowledged needs are you currently sacrificing for the sake of others? The very essence of the shadowed feminine lies not just in the silent bleeding, but in the profound sense of isolation that often accompanies it, the feeling of being utterly alone in one's struggle. The price we pay for being ourselves is worth it, wrote the great existentialist Albert Camus, a sentiment that resonates deeply, yet for many, the self they present to the world is a meticulously crafted facade, a shield against perceived judgment or burden. This facade, while protective, exacts a heavy toll. It severs the very connections that could offer solace, creating a vacuum where genuine reciprocity should exist. It's a cruel irony. The more a woman gives, the more she might unconsciously push away the very support she desperately needs, fearing that revealing her vulnerability would shatter the image of strength she so carefully maintains. This isolation is a complex tapestry woven from various psychological threads. Consider the pervasive societal narratives that often glorify female self-sacrifice, subtly encouraging women to place the needs of others above their own. From a young age, many are implicitly or explicitly taught that their value is intrinsically linked to their nurturing capacity, their ability to soothe, to care, to put others first. This external validation, while comforting in the short term, can become a golden handcuff, binding them to a role that slowly erodes their inner reserves. The relentless pursuit of this external affirmation, as B.F. Skinner might observe through his lens of operant conditioning, creates a powerful reinforcement loop. When Alara received praise for her empathy, for her unwavering support, it acted as a positive reinforcement, strengthening the behavior of self-abnegation. The more she helped, the more she was praised, and the more deeply ingrained became the pattern of prioritizing others' well-being over her own. The immediate reward of seeing another person heal, of receiving their gratitude, often overshadowed the slow, insidious drain on her own spirit. Moreover, the phenomenon of projection comes into sharp focus here. Often, those who tirelessly care for others are projecting their own unmet needs onto the people they assist. They see their own unacknowledged wounds reflected in the pain of others and, in attempting to heal those external manifestations, they vicariously attempt to heal themselves. It's a powerful, albeit indirect, form of self-soothing. This is where the wisdom of Carl Jung's concept of the anima and animus becomes profoundly relevant. For women, the anima represents the unconscious masculine qualities, and the animus, for men, the unconscious feminine. However, a more expansive view of these archetypes suggests that within each individual lies a full spectrum of energies, both traditionally masculine, assertion, rationality, action, and feminine, nurturing, intuition, receptivity. When a woman over-identifies with the purely nurturing, receptive aspects of the feminine, she may suppress her more assertive, self-protective, and boundary-setting energies, which could be considered aspects of her undeveloped animus. This suppression contributes to the inability to advocate for her own needs, deepening the isolation. The silence that often surrounds this suffering is also a product of the internal critic, often a manifestation of the superego in Freudian terms. This internalized voice, shaped by societal expectations and early experiences, whispers insidious messages. You're being selfish. Good women don't complain. You should be stronger. These internal admonishments create a powerful barrier to vulnerability, making it incredibly difficult to reach out, to admit to needing help, or even to acknowledge the depth of their own pain. The fear of being perceived as weak, as incapable, as less than the idealized image they present, drives them further into solitude. They fear shattering the illusion of the perpetually capable, always giving woman. Think of the Stoic ideal, often revered for its emotional resilience. Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, their teachings emphasize control over one's emotions, focus on what is within one's power, and acceptance of what is not. While valuable for navigating external adversity, an overzealous application of Stoicism, particularly in emotional caregiving, can be detrimental. It can lead to the suppression of genuine emotional responses, a stoicism of the soul that rejects the very human need for connection and shared vulnerability. For the woman who heals others but bleeds alone, her stoicism often manifests as an inability to articulate her own suffering, a silent endurance that eventually wears her down. She internalizes the dictum to control her reactions, extending it to the suppression of her own pain, believing it to be a sign of strength, when in fact it leads to profound loneliness. This psychological isolation isn't merely a feeling. It has tangible impacts on mental and physical health. The constant emotional labor, the suppression of personal needs, and the lack of reciprocal support create a breeding ground for burnout, anxiety, and depression. The body, as a holistic system, cannot perpetually give without replenishment. The psychological weight manifests physically, leading to chronic fatigue, unexplained aches, and a pervasive sense of depletion. It's a quiet scream that only the individual can hear, a testament to the unacknowledged trauma of constant emotional output without adequate input. The very acts of empathy and care, when unchecked by self-preservation, become self-destructive. The archetypal figure of the isolated caregiver, though seemingly strong, is often deeply entrenched in a pattern of unacknowledged trauma. Their capacity for empathy might be rooted in early experiences of having to attune to the emotional states of others for their own survival or comfort. The theme that emerges here is the critical distinction between healthy empathy and pathological enmeshment. Healthy empathy allows one to understand and share in another's feelings without losing oneself. Pathological enmeshment, however, blurs the boundaries, leading to a loss of self in the service of another. For you, the woman who recognizes this reflection, it is imperative to challenge the ingrained narratives that equate self-sacrifice with worthiness. Begin by asking yourself, what unspoken fears keep you from revealing your vulnerabilities? What beliefs about your value are tied to your ability to give? Acknowledge that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but an act of profound strength and self-respect. It is an act of individuation, the process of developing a unique psychological identity, distinct from the collective unconscious and external expectations. Just as you create safe spaces for others, you must begin to carve out sacred spaces for your own healing, your own quiet replenishment. Who in your life genuinely sees you beyond your role as a caregiver? Seek out those connections and dare to be seen in your entirety, not just the strong, unwavering facade. The most profound aspect of the journey from bleeding alone to vibrant wholeness lies in the painful, yet ultimately liberating, process of confronting the deepest fear, the fear of truly receiving. It is a terrifying prospect for the perpetual giver, for it challenges the very foundation of their self-worth, which has long been built on the act of giving. The third aspect commonly found in the shadowed feminine, therefore, is the formidable wall built around self-receptivity, the inability to allow others to nurture, to care, to simply be there for them without an immediate urge to reciprocate or deflect. This resistance is often so ingrained that it operates beneath conscious awareness, a subtle flinching away from genuine compassion when it is offered. Imagine a delicate, ancient wellspring, long dedicated to slaking the thirst of an entire village. For generations, its waters flowed outward, pure and abundant, providing life and solace. The wellspring knew nothing but giving. But over time, the ground around it, once lush, became parched from overuse. The wellspring itself, though still flowing, began to feel the strain. Its depths were no longer replenished by the quiet rainfall or the subterranean currents. Yet, when a villager, noticing the subtle signs of its depletion, approached with a bucket of fresh water, ready to pour it back, the wellspring, in its ancient wisdom, or perhaps its conditioned nature, would resist. Not with malice, but with a deep-seated, almost instinctual conviction that its purpose was only to give, never to receive. It had forgotten how to accept, how to allow itself to be refilled. This is the inner landscape of the woman who struggles with self-receptivity. This resistance to receiving is often a complex interplay of several psychological dynamics. Sigmund Freud, though perhaps not directly addressing this modern predicament, laid the groundwork for understanding the unconscious forces at play. The ego, in its quest for control and self-preservation, can find vulnerability profoundly threatening. To receive means to acknowledge a need, to admit a lack, and for someone whose identity is forged in being the one who fills needs, this can feel like an existential threat. It shatters the carefully constructed illusion of self-sufficiency. The unconscious belief that if I need, I am weak, or if I receive, I am a burden, becomes a powerful barrier. This is further compounded by what Albert Bandura's social learning theory might illuminate. Observing others, especially women, consistently prioritize external demands over internal needs, reinforcing the idea that this is the correct or laudable way to be. If society rewards constant giving, then receiving might feel countercultural, even shameful. The journey toward genuine receptivity involves confronting the embedded narratives that equate self-worth with endless self-sacrifice. It requires a radical shift from an external locus of validation to an internal one. Carl Jung's emphasis on unconditional positive regard becomes paramount here, but directed inward. Can one offer oneself the same boundless acceptance and non-judgment that they so readily extend to others? The answer, for many, is a resounding and painful no. This is where the profound work of trauma psychology intersects with the path to self-worth. Often, the inability to receive stems from earlier experiences where vulnerability was met with neglect, criticism, or even exploitation. The developing psyche, in a bid to protect itself, learns that it is safer to be the giver, the helper, the one who is indispensable, rather than the one who needs. The act of receiving, then, triggers echoes of past pain, a deeply ingrained survival mechanism that whispers, "Don't let your guard down." For Alara, this final, most challenging layer of her shadowed feminine began to unravel through a series of unexpected encounters, almost synchronistic in their timing. After her quiet moment of introspection, a colleague, observing her increasing fatigue, tentatively suggested a mutual exchange of support. Alara, her colleague, a warm and insightful woman named Dr. Lena said gently, "I've noticed you always offer such profound insights, and you carry so much for your clients. But who carries for you? I'm going through a challenging time with my own family right now, and I would value your perspective, but I also want to offer you a space, without judgment, to just be." Elara felt the familiar resistance rise, a quick, almost visceral urge to decline, to assert her unwavering strength. But Lena's gaze was steady, compassionate, reflecting a recognition of Elara's humanity, not just her professional role. Hesitantly, Elara began to share, not her clients' stories, but her own quiet anxieties, the persistent hum of exhaustion, the profound loneliness she often felt after a day of intense emotional labor. Lena listened, truly listened, without offering immediate solutions or platitudes. She simply held the space, her presence a silent testament to validation. In that reciprocal exchange, a subtle shift occurred within Elara. She found that by allowing herself to be witnessed in her vulnerability, a tiny crack appeared in the protective wall she had built. It was uncomfortable, almost terrifying, yet undeniably liberating. This was the beginning of Elara's true individuation process, the psychological journey towards becoming a whole, integrated person. It wasn't about becoming perfect, but about integrating the disowned parts of herself, the needy self, the tired self, the self that yearned for external care. She began to consciously practice setting boundaries, not as rigid walls, but as permeable membranes that allowed for healthy exchange. She learned to say no, not with guilt, but with a quiet conviction that it was an act of self-preservation, an honoring of her own limited resources. This was deeply influenced by the pragmatic wisdom found in Dale Carnegie's principles, albeit applied internally. How to win friends and influence oneself by valuing personal integrity and well-being over constant people-pleasing. She started to see that her capacity to give was directly proportional to her capacity to replenish. The climax of this internal transformation came during a particularly stressful period at work. Old patterns resurfaced. The urge to take on more, to carry everyone's burdens, was almost overwhelming. But this time, something was different. Instead of pushing through until she broke, Elara paused. She closed her eyes and visualized the ancient wellspring, now not just giving, but also receiving the gentle rain. She imagined the water rising, clear and restorative. She then did something she had never truly done before. She reached out for help, not just to Lena, but to her supervisor, articulating her needs clearly and calmly. The response was not rejection, but understanding and support. In that moment of courageous vulnerability, the deepest wound began to truly heal. It was a release, a letting go of the profound need for external validation, replaced by a quiet internal affirmation. The character archetype that emerges fully in Elara's rebirth is that of the empowered self. This is the wounded healer who has not only navigated her own suffering but has integrated its lessons, transforming pain into profound wisdom and self-love. The theme is the undeniable truth that true strength lies not in endless giving, but in the radical act of self-compassion and balanced reciprocity. For those of you who find yourselves in the lingering shadows of Elara's past, constantly pouring out while bleeding alone, understand this: your worth is not measured by your utility to others. It is inherent, sacred, and independent of any external role you play. The profound act of healing begins when you dare to acknowledge your own thirst, when you allow yourself to receive without guilt, when you dismantle the internal barriers that keep you isolated. Embrace the wisdom of Carl Rogers and extend that unconditional positive regard to the most deserving person in your life, yourself. Practice mindful self-compassion, recognizing that your struggles are part of the shared human experience, not a solitary burden. Engage in the quiet rituals of self-care, a silent walk in nature, a moment of meditation, a yoga practice that grounds your body and soul. These are not selfish acts. They are acts of profound self-love that replenish your spirit and allow you to genuinely engage with the world from a place of fullness, not depletion. Your internal power is waiting to transform you. Begin with small, conscious steps towards self-receptivity. Allow a friend to buy you coffee. Accept a compliment without deflection. or simply sit in stillness and acknowledge your own exhaustion without judgment. This is your rebirth, your journey into becoming whole. You are worthy of receiving the same boundless compassion you offer to the world. What one small act of receiving will you commit to today to begin replenishing your own wellspring? Please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with other friends to spread valuable insights in life. Thank you for listening. The end.